Well, good morning, friends. Welcome to our first Talkback Tuesday of the 2024 school year. I was out of town at some meetings last Tuesday for our conference, so we didn't start last week, but now we are back in the flow, and we'll be doing this every Tuesday. So this is a time for us to gather, to reflect on any questions that have come up since last Sunday related to our sermon or other things like that. We are live on Facebook and YouTube, and I think I'm able to monitor the comments, so if anybody's watching live and has a question or comment, we would welcome those and we would address them as we receive them. I have a couple things I've gotten back from folks since Sunday, and so we'll talk about those, and then we'll also take a peek ahead to what's happening next Sunday, what we're going to talk about. But first, just want to talk about a couple things happening around the church this week. Social Justice Choir has resumed. And so if you want to connect, if you aren't loving our new worship style and want to have a chance to sing some different music, to be in a choir context, to connect with some people, to hear Chris play, Thursday nights at 5:30 is our Social Justice Choir rehearsal. And then throughout the fall, as we have anthems, we'll be playing those in our Sunday morning service. So the Social Justice Choir will still have a place in our Sunday morning service. And then as we move towards winter and into the holiday season, as the semester kind of wraps up, the Social Justice Choir will do a showcase concert, and we'll share all that information when we get a little bit closer to that. In addition, be watching out. We are going to be doing 2 hymn sings this fall, and those are going to be evening events for us just to gather and celebrate and enjoy some more traditional music together, since we've kind of shifted the focus on our Sunday morning piece. And so keep an eye out for those events. The other thing is that we are currently in office hours, and so I have stepped out to do this, but our office is open. We'd be glad to make you a cup of coffee. If you're looking for a place to connect, if you just need a place to do some studying or do some work, our Wi-Fi is available, and we'll have coffee. And so whenever Talitha and I are in the office, and that's Tuesdays and Thursdays from 8:30 to 2:30, our church is going to be open. And so we'd love to have you stop by to connect, to be around others, or just to kind of work quietly by yourself in a communal space. We would love to have you. So those are the announcements, the big stuff that's happening right now. I want to reflect and revisit Sunday a little bit. So for those of you with us in person or joined us online, we had a conversation around pronouns and the ways that we talk about God, specifically in Scripture and also in our music. And there's a piece that I didn't say that I think I need to address. Because one of the questions was, why didn't we sing any songs then with female pronouns for God? And there is a very sobering but simple answer to that, and that is because I couldn't find any in the resources that we're using for the way we're doing worship now. So I know the United Methodist Hymnal and some of the other supplemental resources like the book called The Faith We Sing have some more inclusive songs, but as far as like what we're looking at now, it's hard to find recordings of songs that refer to God in any way other than, at best, neutral terms, gender neutral terms, but for sure in anything other than the male pronouns. And so for me, as I've reflected, it's just a reminder of how far we have to go in this area. I think the fact that many of us do not pay a lot of attention to this area is telling. And the fact that as we look at modern music about God, that it relies almost entirely, except for the situations where we're gender neutral, on male pronouns is telling. A few years ago, I had a conversation with a now friend named Mark, and many of you know Mark. He's a part of our worshiping community from time to time, and part of Vermilion's community. And one of the things I shared in that conversation, don't remember how it came up, but for a few years now, I've been trying to not refer to God in gendered terms. I remember him like really resonating with this idea, and for me, it's something that I had been in process on for a while, but something that became this really interesting conversation point. And so my hope, I want to be really clear on this, is that at some point, there are more options to talk about God as we understand the fullness of God in our worship music. I would love for us as a church at some point, as we develop worship and as we build a band and kind of move in some of those directions, I would love for us to be able to sing songs and modify them in-house to include a broader understanding of who God is. At this point, we can't, and that, quite frankly, sucks. And so this is one of those moments for us to say, how do we help move this conversation forward as a church, in our broader community, in the United Methodist Church at large? How do we continue to push conversations and to create opportunities to talk about how we understand God, how we see the divine feminine represented throughout Scripture? I mean, the metaphors of God giving birth to all humanity are very feminine by their very nature. And so I think we as a church and I as clergy and my colleagues need to do a better job of not only referring to God in ways that leave open the possibility of how big God is, but also use our language to change and to challenge and to push these conversations forward. So if you were struck by the prevalence of the he's and the hymns and the songs we sang Sunday, know you're not alone. And others see it too, and that's part of why we're having this conversation. And we're not there yet. There is a lot of work to do. And I think for me, and I know for a few others, this past Sunday pointed out just how far we have to go in some of these areas. And this is where we balance it, we get to choose how we interact with this stuff. We get to choose for each of us on an individual level and as a corporate church level how we talk about God. And so we're going to use different language at times, and it's not always going to be consistent. So if consistency is your thing, we're going to change the language around. But that's, again, because of what I talked about at the beginning of the sermon, that we are finite beings with finite language trying to describe that which is beyond our comprehension, and because of that is inherently indescribable. And so our language is going to fail. And I don't use that flippantly to kind of blow off the conversation or minimize the damage and harm that's been done through the language we've used about God, but to say, yes, we're in, and it's going to take work, and it's work we're committed to, and there's a long ways to go. So God is more than male. God is not male, but this is the language that, in attempts to describe this indescribable, the largely male authors of Scripture and of much of our worship music have used language that describes themselves and have made God in their own image. And we need to be aware of and address that. So that's this past Sunday. Again, if you were there, thank you. If you watched online, feel free to submit questions or conversations with anything that happens here. There's going to be a link in our newsletter. And we're going to keep trying to find language that is more accurate to the fullness of who God is. So this Sunday, looking ahead, we would love to have you join us. One of the rituals of the church is communion. And so this week, we're going to be participating in that ritual. Kelly's going to bring bread that is in line with our United Methodist understanding of an open table. And so if you don't understand what that means, let me just say we intentionally use a bread that is dairy-free, gluten-free, soy-free, that is free of most of the major allergies that we are aware of, so that everyone can participate at this table. We also use grape juice instead of wine because we understand that even being in the presence of alcoholic substances can be very challenging for some of our siblings, and we want nothing to stand in the way of people coming to the table. And so we're going to look at a song called Death Was Arrested by North Point Worship, and we shared a link to that yesterday on our social media, so you can go listen to that. And we're going to talk about what is this ritual, what does it say, and we may even dig into some of the bigger theological questions of what's happening in this act, both in the act of communion, but what does it mean to remember, and what does it mean to see the acts of Jesus, the redeeming works on the cross. Even using those words, what do we mean by those words? Because here's the thing, the meaning of the resurrection and crucifixion and all of this, how all of this plays into our human existence that is both very physical here, but there's also this spiritual divine element, is a significant conversation. And so we're going to talk about that. What's happening on the cross? What's happening as we remember? What's going on here? So it should be a fun one, especially if you're a little bit nerdy like me, and we'd love to have you join us. That'll be 10 o'clock Sunday morning. You can join us here, Facebook or YouTube where you're watching, or at the corner of Dakota and Maine in Vermilion, South Dakota. 10 o'clock, love to have you there. And until next week, have a good one, and keep thinking intentionally about how we talk about our God. We'll see you next week.